Hey everybody, and welcome back to my channel, and welcome to this week's Friday Reads, where I talk about everything I read in the last week, and what I am currently in the middle of, and what I think I'm going to be getting to next week. And we are just going to jump right in and start with Middle Game by Shannon McGuire. So this is the first book in a companion series, and it is adult and it is contemporary and there is magic. I'm not entirely certain of the actual subgenre, but it is adult contemporary with some kind of magic. But we are following an alchemist who is trying really hard to take the doctrine, which essentially is reality. I'm not entirely certain what the doctrine actually is, but he's trying to take it and embody it into babies, essentially, so that when those babies get older, they will be able to control reality. And if he's controlling them, then he will also be able to control like what they do with reality. But of course, nothing is quite that simple, and the story goes from there. Before I forget, there are a ton of content warnings for this book, so if you need those content warnings, please check them out, because this is a book that is pretty hard-hitting emotionally, and it does not shy away from a number of topics, so just be aware. But this is actually a reread for me, and I liked it so much better on this reread. So the first time that I read it, I knew that I enjoyed the general story, but I felt like so many of the details were over my head. And on this reread, some of the details are still a little over my head, mostly because there is a children's story, like there's a children's story in this world, and it is being used as kind of like a metaphor for some of the stuff that's going on in this book. And we do get excerpts from that story, but I didn't feel like we got quite enough for me to feel comfortable, so that was still confusing. But there is some timeline wonkiness and just generally what we were doing with this story that I don't think that I quite got it the first time around, that I understood much better this second time. So yeah, I really enjoyed it. Surprisingly so. It's definitely not the kind of thing that I would normally pick up, but it was definitely very enjoyable as a palate cleanser, and I ended up giving it 4.5 stars. And then I also finished Case Studies in Retrofitting Suburbia by June Williamson and Ellen Denham Jones. And this is a textbook, and it is exactly what it says in the title. This is really looking at how to take suburban areas and retrofit them to address some of the problems that suburban areas tend to create. And it's broken up into two parts. The first part is just talking about the problems that suburban areas create, and the second section is really just the case studies of people around predominantly the US retrofitting suburban areas and how they do it, and like what problems they're addressing with their retrofits. And for the most part, I actually really like this. I found it fascinating, even as there was quite a bit that was over my head, because this is a textbook for like people who are more learning about like planning, like going into urban planning kind of thing, which I definitely am not. So like there was some stuff that I didn't quite understand, but I was able to get the gist of most of it. And it was fascinating to learn about the variety of ways that we can address some of these problems. However, I did have some problems with this book, and they range to very personal to like actual issues that should have been addressed. But like, for example, there are some like things that I don't think that everybody's going to catch. So for example, the fact that the authors link health and obesity in a way that has not been proven. So basically they were saying that we know that Americans are getting more unhealthy because Americans are getting fatter, which is that's a causal link that they are saying, that obesity causes health, and that link has not actually been established. And so it's really frustrating to see it in a textbook, and it's something that not everybody knows, but in this book it does come up to varying degrees. Like one case study, it was pretty much all about that, and it was very unfortunate. So you may, or your mileage may vary on that. I was also hoping for a little bit more variety in the case studies, because the case studies really do focus pretty heavily on high density kind of retrofits. So adding in a lot more housing units and really turning a lot of areas more into like urban areas, which I was hoping for a little bit more variety, because I think that it's good in some instances to turn places into more urban areas, have high density mixed use, all this kind of stuff. I actually think that that's really good, but I don't think that that should be the only solution that we have for the suburbs, because it kind of ignores the reason why some people move to the suburbs, which is to get away from the people. So for me, like, we are in a larger we're in a larger city simply because like that's kind of where we needed to be for my husband's job. But like, I don't really like being in big cities, which I know for a fact because I've done it before. And like, and so the way that we kind of deal with it is to be in the suburbs where there are fewer people. And there are a lot of things I don't like about being in the suburbs, but it's trumped by the fact that I need to not be surrounded by people. And so the fact that like so many of these case studies are really looking to add housing really kind of ignores some of the reasons that people are going into suburban areas. So I would have liked to see a little bit more. There was one really fascinating case study where it was like the retrofit was basically taking a house lot, I believe, that was like just over 3/4 of an acre and adding more housing on it, but like townhomes, like little cottages that look very, very similar to the style of the houses in the rest of the neighborhood. So it felt like it very much fit in. It was adding some density without making it high density. And like, I actually really, really appreciate that kind of a case study. So there was some of it, but there wasn't as much as I was hoping for. And then the actual thing that I think really actually should have been changed, because I know that like the case study mix is very like a personal opinion, but the thing that I think that actually was not good is that the authors were not very good about addressing problems with specific projects, like potential problems that could come up or actual problems that did come up from retrofits. So one of the examples that really bothered me is that there was one project where essentially they needed to deal with stormwater. There was so much runoff, it was like backing up the sewer system. So they decided to make a park with a stormwater pond that would collect much of that runoff. And they specifically chose to put it close to some low-income, high-density housing that didn't have a ton of access to green areas. So it was like, oh, they can use the park. They'll be able to have a park. And I thought that was great. And then, like, kind of almost in passing, it felt, the authors mentioned that because this park became so popular, a lot of those low-income residents ended up getting priced out of that housing. And so they're no longer there, the vast majority of them. And then they just kind of like moved on. And I was like, no, that's actually a huge problem, especially as you're talking about the fact that like these projects need to address and be cognizant of the fact that they're going to be displacing some people. And if it becomes very popular, like, yeah, housing prices are going to go up. So what are you going to do with people, low income folk who are living in the area? It was just like we blew past it, but I'm like, no, that's actually a huge problem that this project created. We shouldn't be just blowing past it. And it was like, at least in that instance, it was mentioned. There were other instances where like I could very clearly see that there could be a problem and there was just nothing that was brought up. So I think that that kind of needed to be reworked, but overall I still think it was very, very interesting and I gave it 3.5 stars. And then the last thing that I finished last week is An Artificial Night by Shannon Maguire, the third book in the Toby Day series. So the Toby Day series is an adult urban fantasy series where we are following our main character of Toby Day, who is half fae and half human, and she is a knight, and she is frequently thrown at various problems because, like, she's just the best person to solve them. She maybe has the skills that are necessary. And in this one, Toby's longtime friends, Mitch and Stacy, well, their children have gone missing. And so now Toby needs to track them down and figure out exactly what is going on. And the story goes from there. And this is, again, a step up in terms of quality for things like world building and character arcs and even like the writing itself. However, I finally figured out like why this one bothers me, apart from the fact that it's missing children, which is a recurrent theme in this series, which makes sense because it's about fairies. And that's kind of a thing that happens with fairies, is missing, stolen children. But apart from that, I figured out what bothers me about this book, and it has the same problem that the third Lord of the Rings movie has, which is you get to about halfway into the book and you're like, oh, this is like the ending, right? Like, this is the natural conclusion to this storyline, right? And the book is just like, no, there's more. And you're like, oh, okay. And then you get to another part and you're like, but this is the ending, right? And the book is just like, no, there's more. And it's like two false endings for the one real ending. And I don't like that. That's kind of where I'm at. I think that the structure itself is fine. I think that there just wasn't quite enough skill there to really pull off this kind of a storyline. And so it felt like it was kind of dragging because we just kept going past the natural ending point. So yeah, I mean, I think it, with a little bit more skill, it could have been done better. But anyway, so yeah, but other than that, I think that there's a lot of really cool things going on here. We get to meet some very key characters. We get some poignant moments with other key characters, and just generally, it's really fascinating because like this is like the final step before okay, so in the next book, this is the final step of the world building before everything kind of clicks in the next book. And I am just like, oh yeah, like in this book, you can finally kind of see the shape of the world, and it's just utterly fascinating. And next book, we get enough that everything kind of clicks into place. So yeah, it's still really good, but like, there's some issues. And I think I finally settled on like 4 stars for this book. So then what I'm currently in the middle of, I picked up Late Eclipses by Shauna Maguire, the 4th book in the October Day series. Now, I had no intention of actually going back to back with these books, but the Avengers Readathon is having a boss battle going on, and I decided to participate. And so, this was like the one that was going to fit the prompts the best, so I went ahead and picked it up. In this particular book, Toby's longtime ally is sick in a way that nobody really understands, and there's a reappearance of one of Toby's longtime enemies, and she's got to figure out what's going on before anybody dies, and the story goes from there. And I am now on page 64, and we're getting past like the beginning. So the beginning, it's like typical urban fantasy in that the beginning is like a recap of the previous books. And I'm just like, yes, I know. So it's not the most interesting part. I'm finally past the majority of that, and so I can get into the series, into this story. I'm really excited because, like I said, this is where the world building tends to really click into place. This is the turn. If you can make it in this series to this book, like most people continue on for the rest of the series, because this is where it's just like, oh, we've been building towards something. So yeah, I'm past the point, I'm past the repetitious point, and so now I can just enjoy it. And then I am also in the middle of Groundbreaking Food Gardens by Nikki Jabor, and this is just 73 plans that will change the way you grow your garden. And it really is just that. It's a bunch of like plans of like various people and what kind of garden they have and how they lay it out. Like this is a formal herb garden, or excuse me. This one is, you know, one person's like heirloom garden kind of thing. And it's really interesting. I'm 110 pages in, and it is very interesting. However, I don't think that this is a book that was intended to be read cover to cover, like very thoroughly. More like what kind of garden interests you, and go read that specific entry, because a lot of it is pretty repetitive, and like I'm starting to skim some of them because it is so repetitive. Now, I don't regret picking this up simply because it is interesting. It's got me thinking about gardening in a different way. Like, we're debating adding some fruit, so like a plum tree or potentially some raspberry bushes, which I'm very excited about. But and the other thing is I'm learning the occasional tip. Like, I did not know this, but apparently like the older lineage of like marigolds, the really smelly ones apparently, will help keep rabbits out of your garden. So if you plant like a border of marigolds, they are less likely to eat everything that you have in your garden, which is good for me to know because like we have a rabbit problem. They like to eat our vegetables. So it's been really interesting, but yeah, like I am definitely starting to skim it. And if you pick this up, which I think it's an interesting resource, it's like I said, just go to the gardens that seem the most interesting and read those entries. So what am I going to be reading next week? Obviously, I want to finish Late Eclipses. I want to finish Groundbreaking Food Gardens. Also, I would really like to actually pick up Marked in Flesh by Anne Bishop, which is the 4th book in the other series. And I really want to try Acting on Impulse by Mia Sosa, which is an adult contemporary romance. And it was supposed to be part of my DNF project, but I didn't get to it. But I would like to try it before I take it back to the library. It's probably going to be a DNF, but like I would like to give it a try. So, I think that is more than enough, honestly. I don't know which nonfiction I'm going to switch to once I finish the Groundbreaking Food Gardens. I don't know yet. We'll have to see. I have so many nonfiction to choose from. So I don't know. But I think that is it. So if you have any thoughts or feelings about any of the books that I have mentioned in this video, please leave me a comment down below. Or if you just want to let me know what you've been reading this week, I would love to hear it. But that is all I have. So if you like this video, please give it a thumbs up, subscribe if you want to, and until next time, have happy reading, and I will see you in my next video. Bye!